You will all, I'm sure, be thrilled to learn that because I nearly keep losing my voice every 5 minutes, I'm going to try and not talk very much this evening. Let's see if I can stick to that. Fiona, apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies from Councillor Palmer.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Palmer, former Labour MP for Broxtowe, I believe, is at the Conservative Party conference, which I'm sure he will be thrilled me mentioning. And the minutes then of the meeting of the 6th of September, can I have all those in favour, please show, or agreed, 1 or 2, thank you. Declarations, any declarations of interest, anyone? Seeing none, moving to item 4. Questions from members of the public. There's one question, I believe, Fiona.
That's correct. One question from Mr. Gary Strupp. He's not in the chamber. In the chamber today. He's abroad.
In which case, I gather Councillor Merriweather is going to read the question and the response, and it's a fairly lengthy question and response. Everyone, okay?
Yeah, thank you, Leader. So the question from Mr. Strupp reads as follows: as a long-term resident of Godalming, I was horrified to hear of the council's plans to build housing on the Crown Court car park, a cornerstone of the central high street, and construct some replacement multi-story parking on the Berries site. I should like to ask the executive, 1, why, given this is a major proposal for our community, the council initially planned for only a limited consultation during the busy summer holiday period and designed a questionnaire that deliberately excluded those people wanting to object. In particular, why were these people unable to opine they did not want any housing to be built on Crown Court, nor given the chance to express that view? 2, when and how does the council intend to analyse and subsequently present to members of the public the feedback received from the questionnaire, and will the executive please give a clear assurance that this analysis will include the views of the many people I know who have written directly to the designated consultation email address with their views, as the questionnaire did not give them a chance to adequately express their opinions? And 3, will the council provide a commitment and undertaking that it will halt its plans for building housing on Crown Court and for constructing a multi-storey car park if the majority of questionnaire, email and other respondents disagree with these proposals? So the response is as follows, it is a lengthy question, I will have to give a lengthy answer just to unpack the many issues that it raises, but I would like to thank Mr. Strupp for a very timely question, and perhaps recall, especially for our non-Godalming members, that the concept of building some housing on Godalming's Crown Court car park is only one of several possible elements that have been identified and studied over many years by us and our predecessors as part of a potential package of measures that's capable of resolving the significant pressures we face with our inefficient and indeed wasteful office building, something that we simply can't afford to ignore. It's actually been quite remarkable how many residents are able to remember the cottages that were on the Crown Court car park site for decades, up until the 1960s. But be that as it may, we've started with the assumption that most residents are used to the car park as it is now, and we've worked on that basis. We are a financially and environmentally responsible council, and the housing we would contemplate would be low density, sustainable homes developed by us and for us to rent at affordable and ethical rates on both the Crown Court and the Wharf Road car parks. They would still have to be viable, enough to contribute the much needed recurring revenue income that would not only help pay for the homes themselves, but also contribute to a refurbishment of the council offices that we think could both save hundreds of thousands of pounds in costs that the offices currently waste every year and save tons of carbon that they emit annually. This isn't only a major question for Godalming, it's a significant issue for every council taxpayer in Waverley, all of whom are currently footing the bill for the status quo. That's why it's been a regular feature in our public meetings of this executive, of the council, overview and scrutiny meetings, all since just 2019, including all councillor briefings and some specific public updates that I've given myself, including, for example, to this executive on the 3rd of March 2020, which was considered by the full council on the 9th of June 2020. But as of now, there are still no formal definitive proposals, and rather the current round of preliminary engagement is intended to firstly remind residents of the specific problems we face around the berries, which could be irresponsible to ignore. Second, to explain the concepts and options out of the dozens and dozens we've considered and tested, the options that have survived preliminary analysis and seem to be the most viable or not, and why. And thirdly, most importantly, to seek residents' feedback now before advancing any further to inform the next phase of work, only after which firm proposals may or may not emerge. Proposals that can only then be taken forward for formal consultation. As to where we are at such a tentative stage, such a preliminary round of engagement like the one we're engaged on now is unprecedented. Not only has all of the work to date involved the elected members of this council, but the most recent phase of work that led up to it involved Godalming Town Council too. Our online publicity campaign has been supplemented not only by a standing exhibition in the lobby of these council offices, but also with special in-person events for council staff and in-person public drop-in events on Godalming High Street. And this engagement has still not closed. Further events are still planned throughout this month, including but not limited to a public webinar on Zoom in just over 2 weeks' time on the 19th of October. The survey questionnaire itself is only one component of the engagement as a whole, and which it was designed to be structured but flexible. So not only does the questionnaire itself repeatedly and explicitly invite and provide space for individualized responses, regardless of whether they're positive or not, we've also, as Mr. Strupp notes, even in his own question, plainly invited residents to comment outside of the questionnaire directly to us through the in-person or electronic means we've provided. We're also conscious that residents have also wanted to discuss the project on social media, which we've also tried to track, and residents have always been welcome to use the other communication pathways the council provides, the most obvious example, of course, being this very question that I'm responding to now. We are tracking interactions as well as responses, and based on the data so far, I hope I can reassure Mr. Strupp that the rate of engagement has been steady since July, throughout the summer and since, and it's now October, and the engagement is still very much ongoing. I can also reassure that we're recording for analysis all of the feedback that we receive from all sources and regardless of the nature or degree of the opinions expressed. We're extremely grateful for all of the constructive feedback we've received of all flavors, which has been gladly accepted in the spirit in which it's been offered. But I must also caution that the feedback is not always as binary as might be presupposed. Just for one example, consider a resident who mistakenly believes we're contemplating doing something to Berries Field and whose feedback opposes that, but is otherwise silent. The reality of this situation is that we and this resident are wholly in agreement. And we've said from the outset that, for us at least, Berries Field will not be touched. In substance, this resident has actively interacted with the engagement in a way that actually supports our position on Berries Field and is neutral on the options that are actually on the table. It'll also be important to consider not only the ratio of feedback to the volume of interactions that residents have had with the engagement, but also the ratio of engagement interactions to not only the residents of Godalming, but the residents of Waverley as a whole. As of last week and prior to the High Street in-person events, just for example, the actual survey itself had generated 859 responses. The website providing project information, together with the online copy of the survey, had 3,788 hits with 3,035 unique visitors. And we'd received 290 direct email responses and online comments outside of the survey. And our video, uploaded to the Waverley YouTube channel and shared on social media, had so far been viewed 1,012 times. This engagement is purposed to inform the next more detailed phase of project assessment. Should that pathway lead to definitive proposals or plans of any sort which this executive supports, these would still be subject to formal public consultation, council scrutiny, and then of course approval, at least by this council acting for itself and as the planning authority. For now, we'll continue to study in multi-dimensions those options which could possibly help resolve some of the pressures we face in and around the berries that are only going to get worse. We're doing so because we're a fiscally responsible council that has sustainability, financial and otherwise, at its core. I've remarked already elsewhere on how the uncertain economic conditions may affect our capital projects, as well as our revenue budgets. But even since this engagement started, the conditions have worsened and uncertainty increased dramatically. This is making the pressures on us even more severe, while at the same time undermining our ability to take measures to deal with them. Thank you, Leah.
Thank you, Councillor Merriweather. And also just to add, I think you and I and many of our officers have been talking to a number of people at the engagement events today and also last Friday. And I think I've been taken aback by the number of people who've come in either with a misconception that was very quickly dealt with once we'd started engaging with the facts, but also, frankly, once we're just going into what this is and why, actually people broadly, they certainly left understanding what we were doing, even if they didn't fully agree with it. And as you say, the economy is materially altering even day by day at this point. So obviously we'll be carrying on with the engagement as we've, as you've indicated in your response. For anybody watching this on YouTube or anywhere else, we'll obviously be publishing the dates of any further engagement as we go. And obviously this will continue to be a significant update at all exec meetings and to members here and also at Godalming Town Council. Then moving on to item 5, questions from members. Fiona, is there any additional questions from members this evening?
No questions from councillors.
Thank you. Item 6, leader and portfolio holders updates. As mentioned, I'm not going to speak a great deal this evening. I do just want to say thank you to our teams who are managing the engagement at 69 High Street in regards to the Berries project. They've been dealing with a great many residents throughout the 2 days that we've had so far. Some very good and difficult questions from many, but actually I think it's been really valuable engagement. And that's going to continue over the course of this month. I also just want to say thank you to the team who are handling Ukrainian refugees and guests. I went to the 4th and final of the sessions last night, which was the one for Godalming and Villages. That follows the sessions that I believe started in Cranley about 3 weeks ago, Farnham and Hazelmere in the interim, and finishing in Milford last night. There was about 50, 60 people, guests and hosts, dealing with a variety of questions and issues over the course of the evening. I just very particularly want to say thank you to the gentleman who volunteered since the Cranley round to do all of the translating and has since joined every single session to do that. So thank you very much to him. I shall now move on to members of the executive, starting with Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Leader. This evening, I'd just like to say a few words about customer services. Some time ago in one of my previous portfolio holder updates, I mentioned that in our new customer services department, we had access to a new centralized customer database, which we've called Citizen Hub. This has been put together from all the various databases which are located or were located around the council. Last month, this has now been taken one step further by the integration of Liberty Converse telephony system to the Citizen Hub. This means that when residents call in, if the system recognizes the telephone number of the caller, it will then automatically bring up the customer record with any existing or historical information and transactions which are located in this Citizen Hub. This progress will allow our customer service agents to quickly create a case report for each customer. And if the resident calls again, the agent will have instant access to all the information they need. I would also take this opportunity to mention that I have recently seen a very impressive demonstration of our new digital complaints management system, which has been developed in-house by our business transformation and digital teams. Now, no organization wishes to receive complaints, but when they do so, they should be treated as quickly and effectively as possible. This new module will integrate with Citizen Hub and will then automate many of the manual and laborious steps taken to initiate and resolve customer complaints. So the time taken to bring complaints to a resolution will be improved, and the performance reports fed into management will ensure this is the case. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, Leader. I'll comment first on the enforcement and car parking area. I met earlier today with Richard Holmwood, who I'm pleased to say was appointed as the new executive head of regulatory services. And as such, he'll be responsible for most enforcement across Waverley and Guildford, apart from not being responsible directly for planning enforcement and some enforcement within the housing area. But nevertheless, Richard was running a project at Waverley to look at where we can achieve efficiencies across the enforcement activity across the whole council. And after he's spent some time in Guildford, which he's going to be doing this week, he's going to be discussing with Don Hudd, who's his new executive director, whether or not that exercise can be extended across the whole of the joint to Waverley and executive and Guildford councils. So that will be an example of something where we can get efficiencies, save money and so on across the two councils following set up of the joint management team. In terms of car parking, I'll briefly mention that the continuing improvement of the South Street car park is going on to connect that car park to the Brightwells scheme. And that leads into a discussion on Brightwells. As I reported last time, we were disappointed about Marks and Spencer's withdrawing from the scheme, but Crest are looking to find a replacement or perhaps two replacements for the Marks and Spencer's building within the Brightwells scheme. The other thing I mentioned is that Crest invited the community liaison group, which is the various businesses and other organisations that are near to Brightwells, for a site visit a week or so ago. And I went on that site visit, and I was pleased to say they were all pretty impressed with what they saw, particularly the quality of the build of the small flats, etc., which will be the shared ownership flats. And one of the people on the visit was a chap called Ken Kent, who's a local businessman and a qualified surveyor. And he said he was pretty impressed with the build quality and the scheme as a whole. So that's pretty encouraging. In terms of the opening day, Crest are still working on, of course, finding tenants, and until this can sort out the M&S situation, we can't be exactly sure of when the scheme will open, but it will be sometime, hopefully around the mid next year. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor MacLeod. Councillor Marriott.
Thank you, Leader. Now that Waverley have an EDI, equalities, diversity and inclusion policy in place, the work that needs to be done is just beginning. The policy applies to both the staff and councillors, and of course to the interaction of both of these with the public. It is not a finished document and maybe never can be, as it has to change and improve as society changes outside. The Corporate Equality Group puts in comments on behalf of the staff, and they meet regularly to discuss the issues and to review the objectives and work plan. So far, we have only had one councillor meeting, which was very lively and engaged, and we are hoping to arrange a few more focused meetings to expand the member input into the policy. We are committed to make Waverley an organisation where the objectives of equality, diversity and inclusion are upheld in every part of the system. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Marriott. Councillor Merriweather.
Couldn't quite make out who you were calling there. Thank you, Leader. So look, as you know, I've remarked previously on the impact that current macroeconomic conditions are having on this council. Alarmed as we are about the impact of the latest government announcements, what they'll have on both the financial pressures we face and our ability to take measures to deal with them. For our own finances, our priority remains our residents. For the vast majority of Waverley's residents, any pennies that they may gain from the most recent government proposals will be more than wiped out by the pounds that they'll lose to the unintended but wholly foreseeable economic consequences of them on their savings and their daily cost of living. We've therefore established a cost of living working group to assess and act on the impact of the deepening cost of living crisis on the community that we serve, and we'll update on that in due course. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Merriweather. Councillor Mirrlees.
Thank you, Leader. An update on the MEND application for the museum in Farnham. That's now been lodged after a lot of work done by the officers for what is a very complicated process, and a decision will be made now in March 2023, which is a long time to wait, I know, but it also gives us time to raise other things like funding, match funding, and yeah, hope for the best. It has to be like that, I'm afraid. Okay, so the leisure centres, leisure operators tenders are expected back next month, and it is a difficult period with energy prices rising without identified support from the government. However, the support at the leisure centres given to our Ukrainian guests who have settled in our borough has been exceptional. Free 3-month memberships have been allocated since May. Hazelmere 77, Farnham 146, Cranley 38, ELC 4 and Godalming 66. And when the memberships are up for renewal, they are currently extending them for a further 3 months. Farnham Leisure Centre has also donated swimming lesson memberships, squash and badminton courts, personal training vouchers and a free pool party for the Ukrainian children, which were given out at a local Ukrainian gathering last month. Hazelmere Leisure Centre are providing training and meeting rooms free of charge for volunteers to provide English lessons for Ukrainians in the local area. It has proved incredibly popular, with between 30 and 40 coming to lessons across 2 days. And in Farnham as well, we have the Memorial Hall. We have given them a meeting room to do their English lessons and have free English lessons there. Finally, we get to raising awareness that Surrey County Council have ended our contract to maintain the verges from April the 23rd. And we are working with them to ensure a smooth handover. Obviously, they are looking at doing a lower cut, what is called countryside standard, which is 4 urban and 2 rural cuts per year, as opposed to our 8 and 12 cuts. And we will be talking to them about our project, our process of doing No Mow May, and hope that that is going to continue. But we are already aware that this could possibly result in a barrage of complaints. So we are going to deal with that. We've already got people ready to deal with that. So that'll be acted upon in time. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
apologies, Councillor Meredith, is this an area where Surrey has sort of unilaterally decided that it's doing this again without kind of telling us in terms of this contract?
I don't actually. I think, yes, I think it was a question of we're not doing it anymore. I suppose it's money saving. I don't know.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Meredith. Councillor Rivers.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you. I'm just going to give a brief puff to the autumn edition, the new edition of Homes and People magazine, which is the magazine for Waverley tenants and leaseholders, packed cover to cover, as you would imagine, with exciting and useful articles, and seriously so, of course. Number of things just to pull out from that. You will remember that on the 5th of September, we stopped issuing flexible tenancies in line with our revised tenancy policy. And this, of course, as you will find in a good article in the magazine, is good for all tenants who will now have greater security in their home and be able to stay for as long as they keep to their tenancy agreement terms. Obviously, but well worth reading through. And I understand too that the tenants panel is having its AGM on the 27th of October, which is open for tenants and leaseholders, to which I believe you will be the star speaker. So I hope your voice is back in by then. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Rivers. Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Leader. As I'll be talking about the Sustainability SPD later, I'll save my comments until then. Thank you.
Thank you. And then finally, Councillor Williams.
Following that fine example from Councillor Townsend, as the Sustainability SPD is on the agenda, and also the Carbon Neutrality Action Plan, which encapsulates a lot of the sustainability work anyway, I will pass on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Williams. In which case, then we'll move on to item 7, recommendations from the Overview and Scrutiny Committees. As ever with this, I'll be going through using the tail end of the unique reference for any recommendations that we're discussing. So starting with the resources ONS, unique reference ending 11 on annual complaints. The recommendation here is essentially that we try and do better on our complaints. I don't think there's anybody here who's going to disagree that we should always do better. Unless that figure absolutely said 100% dealt with on time, I would be agreeing that we can always do better. What I think I'd want to add, though, is I hope that the ONS will work with us to think about strategies for how we might actually improve that, rather than just pointing things out. I think it could be more constructive, both of us, both sides of the equation there. But otherwise, I think I'm happy to accept that recommendation. And then the item ending 14, Property Investment Advisory Update. This is to note that Peter Vickers will be updating the committee and the executive regarding Way Court East. And obviously we can, the executive, accept that, and Peter Vickers will undertake that activity in due course. Moving then on to the recommendations from the Services ONS. These relate to the Carbon Neutrality Action Plan. Starting 2.2 is the overview section, so effectively we're just agreeing that that's to note. 22 alpha, in terms of whereabouts housing should be given, and I think the comment that I'd like to add there is that the priority of something in that carbon neutrality action plan is a function of how big its carbon footprint is and how able we are as a council to deal with that directly. Housing is obviously an area where we want to do more, and I imagine that will get revised when we finish the revisions to the HRA and know what we're actually able to do more directly on that subject. Part B, the addition of an action plan to make more extensive use of planning policies. I know this is something that a number of people have been talking about for a little while, in particular Councillor Darcy, one of our colleagues, and I gather the checklist is in a final draft form ready to come round fairly soon, looking at Councillors Townsend and Williams to nod there. Good, thank you. Item C, reviewing the short-term actions to ensure the timescale to deliver has not been affected by the cost of living, and the action precisely identifies what is being delivered in that timescale. There's a few items that could probably do with that kind of refinement, and some of it will have some input from the cost of living working group, as Councillor Merriweather has alluded, but broadly acceptable. And then finally, through the inclusion of footnotes, though the inclusion of footnotes is commendable, a recognised referencing style should be followed rather than relying on hyperlinks which do not work in paper documents. And that's just a note for future drafting about making sure the electronic and the paper one are equally as navigable for whoever is using them in what capacity. Although I would stress, maybe please don't print the carbon neutrality action plan just for the sake of irony. Okay. Any other comments? Actually, I believe we do need to also look at the leisure management contract task and finish group. Councillor Mirrlees, just to confirm with you that I think the first 3 points there have been agreed as part of the tendering process. Is that correct?
Yes, it has.
Thank you. And the 4th point was requesting from the exec that we have some additional steps to keep members up to date, which I think we were planning to do. It's just putting a date in the diary. Okay. Thank you. Any comments from anybody else on the ONS cycle before I move on to part 8? No. Okay, moving then on to climate change SPD, item 8. I've got one speaker on this item, but I'll bring Councillor Hyman in after Councillor Townsend has introduced. Councillor Townsend.
Apologies. Thank you, Leader. As councillors here will know, I believed it was a hugely retrogressive step when the government abandoned the Code for Sustainable Homes back in 2015. And I can't help but feel that new homeowners may be in a very different position regarding the energy crisis if that had remained in place. But even more worrying, recently, the government has torn up its manifesto pledge on fracking and plunged our planet deeper into a climate crisis. Not only is fracking bad for CO2 emissions, it also releases large amounts of methane, a dangerously potent greenhouse gas, as well as the toxic chemicals that are used during the fracking process itself. Let's not forget that the fracking experiment came to an end with a moratorium in 2019, after a tremor hit an area near Blackpool, thousands of times more powerful than the limit drawn up. And that's why it stopped. And despite assurances that it would, that the government would try and get extra evidence or publish further evidence about the safety or otherwise of fracking before it changed its plans, it hasn't done that. I would also point out for this council, declaring a climate emergency is not about, just saving beautiful places and endangered species. It's about social justice as well. And we only have to see the recent devastating floods in Pakistan, where 33 million people have been displaced. I'm really proud of the work that this council is doing on the climate emergency and the climate emergency action plan that Councillor Williams is heading up. And this SPD is a small part of that work, displaying, as Councillor Merriweather mentioned earlier, that we are putting sustainability at the core of this council. This SPD provides further guidance and builds on the climate change policies we already have in Local Plan Part 2. We cannot create new policies from it. It forms the council's response to the climate emergency, and it will become a material planning consideration, influencing new development across the borough, making it more sustainable. This has been something, as the leader mentioned, that councillors have been requesting for some time, and we have got an associated checklist which planners will be using in order to ensure that the guidance within the SPD is followed by planners. It sets requirements for things like renewable energy, water efficiency, sustainable construction and design, as well as requirements to conserve and enhance biodiversity. We do have an extremely beautiful and valued countryside around us. We are surrounded by areas of AONB, areas of outstanding natural beauty, and also several areas of scientific interest, and also our special protected areas as well. However, the UK is one of the world's most depleted, most nature's depleted countries, the world's most nature's depleted countries, sorry. And we're in the bottom 10% globally for biodiversity now. So it is really serious that we do all we can to make steps forward and to try and change what is happening in this borough with regards to development. And I would like to thank officers, and I'm joined tonight by some of the officers who will be able to answer any technical questions that crop up. I'd like to thank them for their hard work on this, and I do hope that councillors will support the adoption of the SPD. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Townsend. And yes, I mean, I think there's a lot of things that a lot of us would have liked to have done that go far beyond this document, but it's just worth remembering that we are locked effectively into the scope of the climate change policies in Local Plan Part 1, which don't give us exactly a large amount of scope to work in without taking drastic action like reopening the local plan, which obviously is not something that we'd be prepared to do at this stage. Councillor Hyman, you've registered to speak on this.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, I'm afraid as it stands, I won't be able to support this if it comes to our next, assuming it comes to our next council meeting without any changes. As you know, I always look at the first test as to whether or not anybody's read a document, and that is very much down to what the content is and what typos are left in there. And if you turn to page 25, if you would, of your committee papers, which is page 16 of the LUC LUC document, and you look at the second, third, fourth, fifth word of page on page 25, and if you try and tell me that a lot of professional people have read this and sorted it out, because that is actually Guildford, not spelled that way, is it? And I would have thought that would have been picked up somewhere along the line if somebody had read this properly. So I'm very disappointed yet again. There's a lot of things in this document, Leader, which really do leave room for improvement. And the question I think you have to ask yourselves is this the sort of quality we should be putting into our policy? There are so many other errors and mistakes in the document which remain, despite the processes it's been through. I mean, it tells us that we're developing an LC whip at paragraph 721, but 712 tells us that we've already got two LC whips on the make. So if you look at 724, the Department for Transport's gear change principles, they're being completely ignored. We've got rules in there at 726, for instance, major development should be sited within 800 metres of a station where available. Well, that means we can refuse virtually every major development in Farnham. This cannot be used and will be thrown out at appeal. That's the problem we've got. It needs to be gone through completely. So I'm afraid I can't support it as it is. I'd like you to if I may specifically, refer you to page 120 of your committee papers, paragraph 1.26, which is within the HRA document, and it refers to the Dutch nitrogen judgment, and I'm going to quote it. This is in respect of mitigation measures for spar sites, and it says, "It is only when it is sufficiently certain that a measure will make an effective contribution to avoiding harm to the integrity of the site to concern," as far as by guaranteeing beyond all reasonable doubts that the plan or project at issue will not adversely affect the integrity of that site, that such a measure may be taken into consideration in the appropriate assessment within the meaning of Article 6.3 of the Habitats Directive. So it's strict. You can't just make things up and pretend. So it's only when our policy is supported by an appropriate assessment to that standard, that's what you're being told here, that we can lawfully consent effective developments without limitation. Of course, what this document does is tell us all the rules and then continue to do the opposite, to evade any sort of assessment of mitigation. Somewhere in the process there has to be that sort of assessment, and as there isn't one, this document, which says it's a plan and says that it must be considered in combination with the other plans like LPP1 and LPP2, which don't have an appropriate assessment, it's all there for you if you want to read it, the law pointing out that actually we shouldn't be doing this. So all I really want to know is, will you admit to residents that we don't have such a document? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hyman. I can certainly admit to residents that I've read at least 4 QC's opinion on the subject of appropriate assessments and the Habitats Directive, and I am quite comfortable with all of those opinions, having all agreed with each other, as well as with at least 2 serving council of this council that have agreed with that opinion. In terms of typos, frankly, I think it's a waste of everybody's time to be talking about typos. We will just delegate authority to the relevant strategic director in this case, alongside the portfolio holder for planning, to correct any typos of the scene. I would request again that if you see typos or other typographical issues in a document, that you just flag it in advance. I've seen plenty of published textbooks where there have been typos, because frankly, people have read them, they've read them to death, they've gone through them many, many times. The odd typo will slip in. I also believe, Councillor Hyman, that there's a number of cases here where you're confusing guidance for policy. And in many of these cases, we aren't actually able to stipulate that it's policy, because we are locked into what I believe CC1 and CC2 of Local Plan Part 1 actually allows us to do. We are confined to that policy envelope, and that means that we can only state guidance, where I can assure you there are many people in this room who would love to create new policy on the subject, but are constrained in doing so by planning policy as it exists in this country at this time.
Point of personal explanation, Leader. I've said absolutely no such thing, and you're just putting words into my mouth continually.
As you aren't a member of the executive, points of personal information.
The question is, do we have that document? And you won't admit we don't. So yeah, let's just leave it at that. Thanks very much.
I refer you again to Council and QC opinion on the subject, Councillor Hyman. I've got Councillor Williams to speak.
Thank you, Leader. I think you picked up 1 or 2 of the points that I was going to make, because I think proofreading a document is not the same as actually understanding the content of a document. And I'm really surprised at Councillor Hyman's comments. Councillor Hyman has suggested the document is not good enough. Well, I would, in that sense, agree with him. It's not good enough because our planning framework is not good enough for us to be able to include the kind of things in a supplementary planning document that we would like to include. We are constrained in terms of that supplementary planning document by the constraints of national planning policy framework, LPP1 and LPP2. And we have spent a long time, and officers have spent hours and hours, and our consultants have spent hours and hours creating this document to push those frontiers as far as they can possibly go to protect our environment, to maintain as sustainable outcomes as we possibly can in respect of planning. And I think it is completely false to suggest that this document could have gone even further. It has gone to extensive consultation. We now have actually very, very clear guidance here in terms of what we can expect of planners, what we should expect of planners, and what would be desirable. And that has come out very clearly in the document. It's as good as it can get, and I think we should fully support it.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Any other speakers? No, in which case I'm going to go to the recommendations. I'm going to add 1 recommendation in front of the one that's there right now, and that is just to authorise the joint strategic director for place in consultation with the portfolio holder for planning and economic development to review and amend any typos or any other non-substantive elements of the document that need checking. And in item recommendation 2.2, which is the original 2.1, it is recommended that the executive recommends to council that the climate change and sustainability supplementary planning document be adopted, and that council subsequently adopts the SPD. Can I have all those in favour, please show? Thank you very much, everyone. Bear with me 1 sec. Item 9 is the Carbon Neutrality Action Plan update, and I shall hand over to Councillor Williams to deliver that update.
Thank you again, Leader. Effectively, this is a report which we are presenting to executive. It incorporates the Carbon Neutrality Action Plan working spreadsheet, which is outlining the progress against the objectives which have been set, the targets which have been set. It also includes our greenhouse gas emissions report. It includes the 2022 version of the carbon neutrality action plan and a summary of some of the direct expenditure on specific projects, mainly pump priming projects around sustainability. It is, as we have said many times before, a fluid document. It will change at each iteration because it needs to take account of changes in technology, changes in financial and ecological changes that as time goes forward. And, you know, that is something which is part and parcel of a document being an organic living document. What it does not do and what it should not do is actually lose sight of the target which we set in our climate emergency declaration in September 2019, which is that we are aiming to become net zero carbon neutral by 2030. So we as I say, are asked to note the progress that's been made, which is outlined in the document, to note the greenhouse gas emissions report, which demonstrates a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions of 34% since our base year. And it also notes that the energy generation from biomass is up by 293%, by solar PV up by 72%. As such, the document has been to the Climate Emergency Board, who will continue to work alongside officers with elements of the plan. The board meets again tomorrow with a specific focus on 2 areas of work where the right approach can make a significant difference and where continuing work needs to be done in relation to the borough's carbon footprint, namely housing, which was raised as a particularly important issue previously, and procurement. So it's as I say, it's a very thorough document. It reflects ongoing work, and it reflects a trajectory towards net zero carbon at the most rapid and most sustained rate that we can manage as a council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. I've got no other speakers registered. Would anybody else like to speak? I think I'll just repeat the point about housing and that needing to be a priority in this, and also just reflecting on Councillor Townsend's comments that had certain subsidies and policies not been removed by the current government in one of its incarnations, we might be a little bit further along. I will just ask the Chief Executive, can you remember when we sent a letter to Jacob Rees-Mogg's predecessor in regards to how the government were going to meet their own 2050 housing targets? Can you remember when we sent that?
Thank you, Leader. I think we've sent quite a few letters over the last year, so we need to check which precise date was that one.
Yes, just for everybody's remembrance, we sent a letter to the government asking not how they would meet our policy of 2030 for net zero housing and insulation, but how they would meet their own policy and how they would seek to fund it, so that we would know roughly what gap we would need to find. And I don't believe we've had any response to that, but that's something we'll check. I'm going to be adding Part D to the recommendations that we also note and wish to include the observations as previously agreed by the ONS services that was previously mentioned in Part 7 of this agenda. So the recommendation is A, notes the progress made on the CNAP during 2022 attached in Annex 1, notes the GHG report attached in Annex 2 and agreed it is published on the Waverley Borough Council website, endorses the updated content of version 3 of the CNAP as presented in Annex 3, and D, seeks to include the observations and comments made by Overview and Scrutiny in their September meeting. Can I have all those in favour, please show? Thank you. And again, thank you to the officers who prepared and continue to monitor this action plan. It's an extremely complicated piece of work of which there is almost no guidance beyond this council in terms of structure from the government. So it is an excellent piece of work. Item 10, Fairground Car Park Development Project Progress Report. I shall now hand over to Councillor Merriweather.
Thank you, Leader. If I can just refer us members to pages 189 to 198 of your packs, including the exempt annex, and recall for you that this report follows on from and updates a report we considered back in March and requests a budget to progress to the next stages, the Fairground Car Park Development Project. The report's actually pretty self-explanatory, and I don't really have anything substantive to add to it now by way of this introduction, other than to emphasize how important the Fairground site is for us, not only for delivering on our corporate priorities, but also for our local plan. At the risk of repeating myself, though, I did remark earlier on the uncertainty in the economy, and it's in that context that I just note, for the avoidance of doubt, that stages 3 and 4 of this project are non-binding, but essential steps preparatory to making any further substantive recommendations, and the funding for it is from a reserve established specifically to fund precisely this kind of work. Thank you.
It's probably worth me noting at this point, this of course is a part of a project that has a similar set of objectives in the main to a project that we've been discussing in Godalming earlier, and is I think good evidence that we're having to consider projects across the borough in order to meet our service obligations.
That's true, Leader. I think what I've learnt over the over these engagements is that residents are sometimes surprised to learn that we don't get any central government funding. We only keep 10% of the council tax that we levy. We only keep 5% of the business rates that we levy. We're on our own, and absent any financial support, we have to consider these sorts of measures to deal with the pressures that are being foisted upon us. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hyman, I've got you registered to speak. It's not my intention to move this session into exempt, so I would ask you to keep your comments relative to that status, and I'll ask you to start now if you're happy to.
Yes, thank you, Leader. I can assure you I've absolutely no intention whatsoever of touching on exempt matters. This is, I think, looking at the recommendation on page 190, Leader, it's really just a brief financial matter. And we're talking about feasibility. And surely, in terms of feasibility, we should first, before we start looking at spending the money and moving on, ensure that we are going to be able to achieve legal compliance. And on a fundamental level, I've already in this meeting and on many others tried to get a response to this very simple question in respect of the people over wind and various other judgments, which of course we know from the 2018 judgment that all of the legal advice over the previous 15 years and continuing was wrong and is wrong. What the barristers are telling you, the law has said, is wrong. And if that people simply can't accept that, then of course that's major problems for a council that is trying to park itself on integrity. But the issue is exactly the same. Do we have, will you admit that we don't have a complete appropriate assessment which would enable us to move forward in certainty that we will be able to achieve legal compliance and see this through? Or is it a case that in this really in the economic circumstances that we're in, until we're sure we can do that, should we not be spending more of our residents' money? So very, very simple. A question that perhaps I'm never going to get a straight answer to, but will you admit that we don't have such an appropriate assessment. Thanks.
As I've already done this once, Councillor Merriweather, do you want to do it this time?
Thank you, Leader. Generally speaking, I think the point to be made is that you know, you can't put the cart before the horse. The whole point of doing these assessments is to get the assurance that you need to take things through to a next step. You can't predetermine the outcome of homework that you haven't done. Specific to the assessment, I'm sorry, Jerry, it breaks my heart to say this, but you say that people don't get it. The only person who doesn't seem to get that we have an appropriate assessment is Councillor Hyman. He's on his own. The legal advice that we get, that we have to follow, says that we do.
Councillor Townsend?
Yeah, I mean, I am aware that at this stage, you know, after having several council opinions, after meeting with Councillor Hyman, after presenting the appropriate assessment to him, after talking to him about bird numbers, after speaking to Natural England several times to gain the information that he had asked for, I am aware that none of this has given him any satisfaction, and he still continues to believe what he believes. The only thing that I can say to him is that he is not supported by any evidence from any other statutory body at the moment. And, you know, so we have to follow what Natural England obviously advise us on. We do everything we are meant to do. Councillor Hyman doesn't agree, and you know, and he's perfectly entitled to raise this. However, it doesn't change the fact that what we are doing is correct and is accepted by other council opinion and also by Natural England, who is a statutory consultee. I just want to say, you know, I have met with Councillor Hyman recently as well, and obviously he still disagrees. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. It's more of a shame, really, that we haven't had the opportunity to discuss what's potentially a really exciting project. And once again, we've gone down a planning rabbit hole that I think has been answered, I think, at least 5 times, in some cases, by senior QCs over the course of the last 5 years. But it is what it is. Any further speakers on the substantive matter in front of us? No, in which case I will go to the recommendation, which I shall read. It is recommended that Executive approve a budget of £125,000 to be met from the Property Investment Reserve to put funds in place to see the project through stages 3 and 4 as detailed in the revised timeline below, and allow feasibility work detailed in exempt Annex 1 to proceed. Can I have all those in favour, please show? Thank you very much, everyone. As I have no reason to move into exempt session, I in fact can close this session at 2 minutes to 7. Thank you all.